The famine had stripped the land of its kindness. Dust lay thick over the cracked earth, and the millet stalks stood dry and sharp as spears. Mothers could no longer fill their children's bowls, and the old ones whispered of past famines with tight lips and hollow eyes. In this time of hunger, suspicion became its own kind of nourishment, something to chew on when the stomach was empty. And on one blazing afternoon, the village found something to feast on: blame. 16-year-old Nala stood before the elders, her arms bound with sisal rope, her knees dusty from being dragged through the central square. She was barefoot. Her eyes, wide, dark, and unblinking, met no one's gaze. People gathered like crows, murmuring as they stared at the girl with the sun-bronzed skin and the silent mouth. She was seen near the chief's granary, a man shouted. Carrying a small bundle, added a woman whose son had been caught stealing mangoes the week before. She's always quiet. The quiet ones hide their shame, someone muttered. Nala said nothing. She hadn't spoken since they pulled her from the edge of the river that morning. She had gone to fetch water for her stepmother, early, before the sun had risen high, but she never reached the stream. She had been snatched from the path by two men and tied like an animal. Her stepmother, Sua, stood with arms crossed, face carefully shaped into sorrow. But in her eyes flickered a thin, sharp triumph, quick and bright like a knife's glint. For years she had resented the girl left to her by a dead husband. Nala, with her silent strength and eyes that made liars feel unclothed. Sua had whispered just enough into the ears of the right people. It had not taken much. She steals from the mouths of your children, Sua said, voice trembling as though with grief. I found husks under her mat. She must have hidden them well. She should be taught, the chief muttered, his own wife clutching his arm, afraid of hunger tightening its grip on their house too. And so they dragged Nala to the granary. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a darkness thick with the smell of old grain, rat droppings, and despair. It was said the rats were the real owners of the granary now, starved and mad, some the size of cats. No child dared go near it after dusk. Let the gods decide, said one elder. If she is innocent, they will spare her. The crowd didn't cheer. Hunger had burned their joy away. But there was a bitter satisfaction in watching someone else suffer. It was easier than watching their own children waste away. They shoved her in and bolted the heavy wooden door. From the inside came no screams, no pounding. Just silence. By nightfall, the wind picked up. A dry, rattling wind that scraped at rooftops and lifted dust like ghosts across the village paths. Mothers clutched their infants tighter. Fathers tried not to look toward the granary, where the rats surely feasted now. In the chief's hut, Sua slept with a smile. Her dreams were vivid, Nala being torn apart, her silence finally replaced with screams. But at dawn, everything changed. The villagers gathered early, some out of guilt, others out of morbid curiosity. The chief's guards unlatched the door, expecting to see bones and blood, maybe a hand nod to the wrist. Instead, the door swung open slowly, and she was there. Nala stood in the granary's center, barefoot, her dress torn at the hem but otherwise untouched. Her skin bore no bite marks. Her face was unreadable. And around her feet, like sentries, sat a dozen rats. Not hissing, not attacking. Just watching. Their tiny eyes glinted in the early sun, their whiskers twitching in perfect stillness. No one moved. Even the bravest men took a step back. She didn't speak. She stepped forward. And the rats followed. Not with the frantic energy of beasts released, but in quiet unity. They walked behind her like a procession, parting only to let her pass through the stunned crowd. A child cried. A mother gasped. Someone whispered, she made a deal in there. She fed them, another said. She's one of them now. But she didn't turn. She walked straight across the village square, eyes forward, shoulders straight. The rats walked behind her, tails dragging lines in the dirt. When she reached the steps of the chief's compound, she paused. Her stepmother stood frozen, mouth open, eyes wide. Nala looked at her. Just one long look. No anger. No glee. Just an unbearable stillness. Then she turned and walked away. And the rats, every single one, turned too, and followed. The village watched them disappear past the eastern huts, into the dawn light. No one spoke for a long time. Even the birds were quiet that morning. It was the beginning of something the village would never forget. But none of them knew it yet. All they knew was this. She had gone in to die. But she came out whole. And the rats, those cursed, filthy things the village feared, had chosen to follow her. Not a word had passed her lips. And that silence was louder than anything they had ever heard. No one spoke to Nala in the days that followed, but no one could stop speaking about her either. The village, already thin with hunger, grew bloated with fear. Every hut buzzed with whispers, even when mouths were dry. They spoke in low voices, as if the rats could hear them. As if she could. She was talking to them, said little Adamu, barely old enough to squat without toppling over. He had snuck near the granary that night with his cousins, watching through the cracks in the wooden planks. She sat down and talked to them like they were people. She fed them, added his older sister, eyes wide. From her hands. They climbed onto her lap. Lies, their father hissed, yanking them inside. You didn't see anything. Keep your mouth shut. Or they'll follow you too. But by then, the truth, or something like it, was spreading like bushfire. The chief sent his guards to examine the girl, their leather sandals slapping the dust as they marched into her compound. They ordered her to raise her sleeves, lift her hem, turn her palms. Not one mark. No bruises. No punctures. No blood. She must have used magic, one guard muttered. Or made a pact. But even they looked uneasy. One had woken that morning to find a rat dead on his mat, its neck broken cleanly, as if by a child's hand. Nala did not flinch under their gaze. She did not tremble or defend herself. She stood as if made of earth and stillness. When they left, the rats peered from behind her cooking pot. One sat on her shoulder as if it belonged there. Her stepmother, Sua, stood at her compound door, watching with growing unease. Something was wrong. The first rat came that night. Sua was lying awake, sleepless, when she heard the soft, distinct rustle, nails on wood, bodies in grain. She lit a small oil lamp and crept toward her storage shed. The smell hit her before she saw the damage. The sacks of millet she had hoarded were torn open, scattered like entrails across the floor. The grain was chewed down to powder, the rats long gone. They hadn't even eaten most of it. They had destroyed it for the sake of destruction. Sua dropped to her knees, frantic, trying to scoop what little she could into her palms. Then she saw it, a small black stone, smooth and round, placed neatly atop the broken sack. A sign. She looked toward Nala's hut across the way. It stood untouched. In the following days, others whispered the same. I found droppings in my flour. They chewed through my door frame. They've never come this close before. And yet, Nala's compound remained clean. The rats clustered around her steps like loyal dogs. They slept in her cooking shed. They followed her to the river and back, a silent procession. She never commanded them, never touched them. But they stayed near. A child began drawing them in the dirt, little circles with tails trailing behind, all facing toward a tall stick figure girl. Some thought it was charming. Others feared what it meant. Still, no one dared confront her. One evening, as the red sun dipped behind the hills and cast long shadows over the dry fields, old man Talu, who had spit at Nala the morning after her release, felt something scratch inside his blanket. He flung it off and screamed. His left arm was already swelling. A single rat sat by the door, its fur matted, nose twitching. It didn't run. Talu was found in the morning, muttering feverish nonsense about eyes watching from under the ground. The healer applied herbs and oils, but the wound would not close. His flesh pulsed and darkened. The villagers said nothing out loud, but their glances said everything. That night, they bolted their doors tighter. The rats didn't come for everyone. Only those who had mocked her, struck her, laughed when she was dragged to the granary. A young woman who once knocked Nala's bowl from her hands awoke to find rats in her shoes. Another, who had led the village children in chanting thief, thief, had her water jar shattered in the night, tiny bite marks along its rim. And still, Nala walked the paths with bare feet and a quiet gaze, her rats never straying far behind. A pattern was forming, though no one dared name it. A quiet reckoning had begun, and it did not shout. It watched. It waited. And it bit only when the silence grew too loud. The village had learned to stop calling Nala's name. Not because they feared her, but because they no longer knew what to call her. She was no longer the girl who ran errands with quiet obedience or sang to herself at the river's edge. That version of her had been locked in the granary and never returned. What came out was something else entirely, something the rats bowed to, something even silence could not contain. She did not speak. Not a word. Not even a breath of song. When the children ran past her home, she watched them with still eyes but never called out. When elders crossed her path, they muttered hurried greetings, pretending not to flinch when the rats darted after her feet like shadows too loyal to vanish. But she did not harm them. In fact, Nala helped. She gathered herbs from the dying hillsides and pressed them into poultices for the sick. She washed the wounds of old women too frail to bathe. She left crumbs for the crows, even as the villagers starved. And at dusk, when the sun melted into a pool of blood behind the termite hills, she knelt beside the ancient mounds and whispered things no one else remembered. It was the old way, the forgotten way. Offerings at dusk. Silence at dusk. Salt circles around the hearth. She's remembering things that were buried, muttered the herbalist, Mama Sisi, as she crushed charcoal into paste. The healer, old and near blind in one eye, was the first to notice what the others only suspected. She helps, she said once. But the earth takes her side. She had treated 6 rat bites in the past 2 weeks. All from people who had once shouted too loudly or smiled too widely as Nala was dragged to judgment. None of the wounds healed. Not even with her strongest oils. The skin stayed puffy, purple. The flesh beneath grew hard and hot. One man's toes turned black. Another woman began coughing blood. But the little boy who shared his yam with her, the healer said to herself, her wrinkled fingers trembling slightly, he was bitten. And by morning, his wound was gone, smooth as bark. News of it spread fast, though never in full words. It traveled through looks, through dreams, through the way people began to avoid each other's eyes. Sua, Nala's stepmother, grew restless. She had not slept a full night in 3 weeks. She lined the edges of her roof with ash, salted the corners of her windows, tied charms above her door. She bought iron traps from the blacksmith and set them near her food stores. The next morning, every trap had been sprung, but no bodies found. Instead, her roof was covered in droppings, and her cooking pot had been chewed through its base, not for food, but for spite. She started sleeping with a stick beside her bed. Then a knife. Then nothing at all, too afraid to move. One night, she heard them, scuttling across the roof like rain, scratching down the walls like fingernails. She wept until the sun rose, and still, they remained. The elders met under the old baobab tree, whispering about what must be done. She's cursed, one said. Or worse, blessed. She's bringing this on us. The children are afraid to sleep. What if she commands them? What if she doesn't need to? They spoke in circles. No one dared to say what they all knew, they had made her this way. She should be sent away, one finally said. And when the rats follow, another replied. To your compound? To your bed? A heavy silence followed. They did not vote. They did not act. They simply watched her more carefully. One morning, a little girl with dusty feet and tangled hair approached Nala as she fed the crows with crumbs of dried roots. The child held out a broken biscuit, all she had, and laid it in Nala's hand. The girl smiled, then ran off. That night, the child was bitten on her calf, a sharp, deep puncture. Her mother screamed. The healer was called. But by morning, the wound had vanished. Smooth as if it had never happened. The village held its breath. That was when they began to understand. Nala did not seek revenge. But something did. Something that walked with her, waited beside her, and watched from the corners of every hut and shadow. Something that remembered who shared, and who took. At first, it came to the village in pieces, scattered whispers that sounded like rumors but trembled with too much truth. The way she moved. The way she stared at the termite mounds at dusk. The way her silence spoke louder than a scream. And then, slowly, in careful fragments stitched together by children's stories and night walkers' mutterings, the village began to learn what happened in the granary. It had not begun with magic. It had begun with terror. The moment the door slammed shut, Nala was swallowed by darkness thick enough to choke her. The smell hit her first, old grain, rat droppings, the sharp scent of mold and decay. Her breath caught. Her hands fumbled over the dirt floor, the rough wood of the door. She screamed. Loud, wild, wordless. She screamed until her throat tore and her hands bled from pounding. No one answered. The rats came slowly. She heard them first, scratching, snuffling, the skitter of claws. They poured from the corners like water. Their eyes glowed red in the dark, hundreds of them, tails twitching like question marks. Nala scrambled to her feet, trembling, her back pressed to the wall. Her voice cracked with sobs. She begged the gods, begged her dead mother, begged anyone to take her quickly. To make it fast. To not let her be eaten. But the rats did not bite. They circled her. They formed a ring around her feet, unmoving. Watching. Waiting. She slid down the wall and buried her face in her arms. She wept until her bones ached, until her breath became hiccups. She begged them to kill her, but the rats only twitched their whiskers. Then, one climbed onto her. She froze. It wasn't large, no bigger than her palm, but it moved with a strange calm, as if it already knew she wouldn't resist. It walked up her leg, along her stomach, and sat on her chest. It didn't sniff or bite. It simply sat there, its eyes glinting, staring directly into hers. And then something shifted. The room went silent, not in sound, but in feeling. Like air being pulled away. Her tears dried. Her body stilled. The rat's weight was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. And she dreamed. She dreamed of a field of grain, not wilted like the ones in her village, but tall and silver under a moon that pulsed like a drum. The stalks whispered, brushing against each other like sisters gossiping. And from between the rows stepped a woman, or something shaped like one. She was cloaked in smoke, and her hair moved like roots in deep water. Her eyes burned like coals, and her mouth stretched far too wide, full of small, pointed teeth that looked like millet husks. Her voice was not loud, but it echoed like thunder buried underground. "You are not their grain," the woman said. "You are their reckoning." Nala wanted to speak, but her mouth would not open. She reached for the sky, but her arms did not lift. "You were sown," the voice whispered, "and now you are harvest." The woman touched Nala's forehead with one long, claw-like finger. Her skin burned cold where it touched. "Do not cry again. Not for them." The dream broke like glass. Nala woke, still in the granary. But everything was different. The hunger that had gnawed at her belly for weeks was gone. Her body felt light. Her throat did not ache. She sat up slowly. Around her, the rats were curled into balls, asleep. They had made a nest around her. Bits of torn grain sacks, leaves dragged in from cracks, feathers, dried grass, woven around her like a cradle. Not one had bitten her. Not one had fled. She rose. The rat that had sat on her chest stirred and leapt onto her shoulder, where it stayed. It did not flinch. She stood in the center of the granary and stared into the darkness. She did not fear it anymore. The walls no longer felt like traps. They were merely walls. And then she waited. She did not call. She did not knock. When the guards finally opened the door the next morning, their eyes widened in horror. But Nala's gaze met them with quiet defiance. They saw her face and turned away. But it was the rats that terrified them. Dozens of them, rising behind her like soldiers behind a queen. They did not squeal. They did not flee. They followed. And she did not speak. Not then. Not since. What had been broken inside her had not mended, it had transformed. And the village, no matter how it tried, could not unsee that girl standing in the doorway of death, reborn in silence, with the eyes of beasts watching from behind her. She had entered as a sacrifice. But she walked out as something else. Not the grain. The reckoning. The granary was an old structure, worn and scarred from decades of storms, droughts, and famine. It stood at the edge of the village like a grave marker for abundance that no longer existed. Yet ever since Nala had walked out of it, that broken storehouse had become something else entirely, something sacred. Children crossed themselves when passing it. Elders avoided its shadow. Even the crows wouldn't perch on its roof. And Sua hated it. She watched the way villagers looked at Nala now, not with pity, but with something much worse, awe. The girl was becoming a myth, and myths had a way of outliving their enemies. In every whisper, Sua could hear herself shrinking. So she decided to end it. She waited until moonrise. A night without wind. A night where the stars blinked slowly, as if they too were holding their breath. She moved like a shadow, carrying a jar of lamp oil wrapped in old cloth. Her hands trembled, but she told herself it was only the cold. She made no sound as she pried open a weak spot in the granary's wall, one that had been patched half-heartedly seasons ago. She poured the oil with shaking hands, the sharp scent rising like a warning. Then she struck the flame. The fire caught fast, greedily licking the dry wood and old millet dust. In seconds, it bloomed upward, snapping and snarling. The orange glow stretched long across the dirt paths of the village. She ran. The alarm was raised too late. By the time the villagers gathered, the granary was already breathing smoke like a beast awakened. The air thickened with heat. Sparks flew into the night. But no one screamed for water. They watched, paralyzed, confused, afraid. And then the rats came. They burst from the flames like bullets, dozens of them leaping from the eaves, the windows, the base of the structure. But they did not burn. Their fur steamed, but their eyes burned brighter than the fire itself. They hit the ground running, silent, precise. And they did not scatter. They headed in one direction. Toward Sua's home. She had barely reached her compound when the first rat slipped beneath the door. Then another. Then 10. Then 20. They came like a tide, climbing the walls, gnawing through door hinges, squeezing through holes no wider than a coin. She shrieked and tried to beat them back with a broom, but it snapped in her hand. She ran for her grain sacks, her last stash of food hidden in her hut. By the time she reached them, they were already shredded, millet scattered like ash, rice ground into powder by sharp teeth. They chewed her blankets, her mats, even the ceremonial cloth she had hidden for her funeral rites. And when she tried to escape, they swarmed the doorway, forcing her to climb onto a stool, shaking and sobbing. All the while, outside, the village stood in stunned silence. Nala stood at the edge of the granary fire. She didn't move. She didn't cry out. The flames danced in her eyes, reflected like a second pair of pupils. Around her, the rats that had escaped the blaze began to curl at her feet, steaming slightly but calm. Like they had done this before. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She's not watching it burn. She's watching it rise." A mother stepped forward, her arms heavy with a bundle wrapped in cloth. She dropped to her knees and offered Nala 2 yams and a gourd of milk. She didn't speak, just placed them gently on the ground. Then another man followed. Then a girl. Then 2 more. A slow procession. They came with eggs, with dried cassava, with the last of their salt. Offerings. Not for forgiveness, but for mercy. Sua's screams echoed through the village before fading into a wet, breathless sob. The rats did not kill her. But by the time they were done, her home was a ruin. Her food was gone. Her linen shredded. Her roof sagged where too many of them had gathered. She emerged at dawn, barefoot and filthy, her eyes hollow, her voice cracked beyond use. She didn't look for Nala. She didn't dare. Later that morning, the chief's wife came to deliver a peace basket, an old tradition, rarely used. It held nuts, dried meat, and beads. She found Nala seated beneath the fig tree near the old well, weaving with quiet fingers. 3 large rats lay curled near her feet, their breathing slow, their heads resting on her ankles like they belonged there. The chief's wife dropped the basket. And fainted. From that day, no one asked who Nala was anymore. They only asked how they could survive her. They called for the diviner from the hills beyond the dry riverbed, an old woman named Ngozi whose eyes were said to see beneath skin and cloth, whose ears could hear lies before they were spoken. She arrived draped in black, with white coerced shells around her neck and red clay smeared on her cheeks. Her cane struck the ground in rhythm with her steps, and her arrival was so quiet, it felt as if she'd been waiting just outside the village all along. The elders gathered in the square. A large ring was marked in the dust, a circle of salt and crushed millet, sacred elements meant to expose deceit, to choke spirits, to bind what should not walk freely. In the center, a stool was placed. Nala was summoned without force. She came barefoot, wearing a plain brown wrapper. Her hair was unbraided, her hands empty. The rats came behind her, as they always did, some running ahead, others staying close to her feet. The villagers tensed. Mothers pulled their children closer. Even the warriors kept their spears low but ready. She reached the ring and stopped. Ngozi raised a hand. You must step inside. Alone. None may cross but you. The rats halted at the salt, forming a perfect outer ring. Not one crossed. Not one even sniffed. Nala stepped over the salt. The crowd held its breath. The old diviner walked around her slowly, humming beneath her breath, casting powder into the air. She tied a strip of dyed cloth over Nala's eyes. Then she lifted a small gourd, shaking it, listening. Nala stood still, hands at her sides. Silent. Ngozi placed a coerced shell on her tongue, then removed it. Inspected it. Tasted the shell herself. Then she burned a pinch of herbs in her palm and waved the smoke around the girl's face. Not once did Nala flinch. Not once did she speak. The rats sat still. After many long moments, Ngozi stopped. She bent down, drew her fingers across the salt, and sniffed it. Then she looked up at the chief, at the elders, and at the watching crowd. She is not cursed, she said. A ripple moved through the crowd. She is not a witch, Ngozi continued. She is not conjured. She is not poisoned. She is not tricked. Then what is she? The chief snapped, face red with fury, his pride now cracking. Ngozi straightened her back. She has been claimed. Silence again. Claimed by what? Someone whispered. Ngozi looked at the rats, then at Nala, then at the fire pit in the center of the square. That is not for me to say. But the earth recognizes her. The grain recognized her. The beasts of rot and root recognize her. And the ring did not reject her. Still, the chief's pride was heavier than his hunger. We cannot allow this to grow, he said. Soon they will call her queen. Soon the rats will eat us all. Enough of this. He turned to his guards. Exterminate them. All of them. Tonight. The order spread through the square like a hot wind. That night, traps were laid. Dozens of them. Old wooden ones and new iron ones. Snares with poison millet. Buckets baited with meat. Sticky pots and fire pits. Young men were chosen as rat hunters. They were given torches, clubs, boots. They boasted as they sharpened their sticks, laughing about how many tails they'd collect. But when the sun rose, none of them were laughing. The traps were all sprung. Every single one. Not a single rat lay dead. The bait was untouched, the snares twisted, the poison licked clean without a trace of fur. And then the bites. The rat hunters were found in their huts, groaning. Some had been bitten on the soles of their feet. Others on their lips. One boy woke up to blood pooling beneath his blanket. The healer could not keep up. The worst part? No one else had been bitten. Not even the children who played outside barefoot. Not even the old woman who'd fallen asleep beside her food basket. Only the ones who had followed the chief's command. That morning, as the sun climbed and the village reeled, Nala sat beside the well, braiding a little girl's hair. Her eyes were steady. Her hands gentle. The rats lounged around her like they were resting after a long night's work. She said nothing. She never did. But the message was clear. You may test her. You may hunt them. But you will never survive what she does not send. At first, it was just one granary. A crack down the side, then a sudden shift in the earth, and it crumbled. Bags of millet tumbled into the dust, trampled by goats before anyone could save them. Then another fell. And another. By the third week, 5 of the village's oldest grain stores had collapsed. Some blamed termites. Others said it was a curse. But everyone noticed the same thing, only Nala's granary still stood. Strong. Untouched. Almost shining. Built by the same hands that once tried to bury her, it now rose like a monument. Her compound was no longer a corner of shadows. It was the center. Mothers with empty bowls and swollen-bellied children came before sunrise and waited outside her gate. They brought beads, carved spoons, goatskin bags. Some even knelt. But Nala never took anything. She opened her door only to the children. They came in silence, holding hands, one by one. Some cried. Some looked back, unsure. But once they passed the gate, the rats led them, sometimes balancing on beams, sometimes weaving between their feet, until they reached her. Nala sat on a stool no one had seen before. It wasn't carved from wood, nor shaped from stone. It shimmered faintly in the light, curved and ridged, made entirely of hardened grain shells pressed and polished until they fit together like armor. Her back was straight. Her face calm. And the rats? They curled around her feet like a queen's dogs. Sleek. Watchful. Silent. She said no words. But she gave every child a handful of grain wrapped in dry banana leaf. Some children giggled when the rats nudged them. Others touched her hand and whispered thank you. One girl tried to hug her. Nala let her. The elders were furious. How dare she ignore us, one barked. We fed her for years, shouted another. Witch, they muttered. Daughter of rats. But when one elder tried to bribe a boy to steal from Nala's granary, the rats found the boy before he could reach the wall. He ran back scratched and sobbing, and that elder never ate another full meal again. People began whispering a new name for her, the Grain Daughter. No one knew where it started. Perhaps a child said it first. Or an old woman who remembered the story of the first harvest spirit. But the name spread like dry wind across a field. Even those who feared her began to speak it with respect. Because now, if you needed to eat, you went to her. Not the chief. Not the council. And then, the chief's son fell ill. It began with a fever. He had gone to the stream to wash, alone, against his mother's wishes. That night, he returned with a bite on his heel. Small. Circular. But deep. By morning, the skin was blackening. By afternoon, he couldn't walk. The healer tried herbs. Poultices. Smoke. Nothing worked. The swelling crept up his leg like creeping vines. His mother wailed. The chief demanded warriors go and find medicine men from neighboring villages. But none arrived in time. And by the third day, the chief swallowed his pride. He stood at the edge of Nala's compound. He did not enter. He did not speak. He only waited. The sun was cruel that day. The dust danced in the air. He stood with a bowl in his hand, not of grain, but of water. Clear and trembling. And still, Nala did not open the gate. It was the rats who came first. 2 of them approached the bowl. Sniffed it. Then one ran inside the compound. When Nala finally emerged, she walked past the chief as if he were a tree. She carried a satchel made from twisted palm fronds. Her eyes were unreadable. Her feet bare. The rats followed behind her in a soft wave of fur. At the chief's hut, the boy lay groaning. His mother rushed to kneel at Nala's feet. "Please," she begged. "Please don't let him die." Nala knelt beside the boy. The bite pulsed like a heartbeat. The rats sat in a perfect circle, tails coiled, noses twitching. She placed a grain shell on the wound. She poured a handful of dirt over it. Then she waited. The room fell silent. Even the boy's breathing slowed. When the shell cracked, not loudly, just a soft tick, the swelling stopped. The blackness began to recede. His mother wept. The chief lowered his head. But Nala did not stay. She turned and walked back home before the boy could whisper his first breath of thanks. That night, every rat in the village returned to her compound. They did not scavenge. They sat. Still. Waiting. And the villagers, even those who once mocked her, left offerings at her gate. Roasted yams. Dried fish. Beads. But Nala took none of it. The only thing she allowed inside were children and grain. And in the moonlight, if you looked carefully, you could see the way her stool caught the stars, how the rats never left her side, how she sat taller than any throne ever carved by man. The night was thick with hunger. The moon watched in silence as the stepmother crawled through the brush behind Nala's compound, her stomach snarling louder than the crickets. Her once rich wrappers hung in tatters, her hair matted with ash. She had not eaten in 2 days, not properly. A few roots here, a stolen half-ripe pawpaw there. But her belly remained a hollow drum. All the village granaries were gone now, except one. And she knew whose it was. She had sworn never to return. Sworn never to kneel before that girl again, the same girl she had once thrown scraps to, barked orders at, beat with the flat end of a broom. But desperation can dig tunnels through pride. So she crept through the dark like a rat herself, eyes wild, breath shallow. The compound loomed ahead. Quiet. Watching. The faint shimmer of the grain shell stool caught the moonlight. And beside it, Nala sat, awake. Waiting. The stepmother gasped. She hadn't expected to be seen. Her knees buckled, and before she could think, her face hit the earth. She crawled forward, shaking, until she reached the edge of the yard where a few dry millet grains had fallen from a child's earlier visit. She bent over them like they were diamonds. And licked them from the dirt. Her lips trembled. Her hands clutched her belly. She sobbed, but no one came to comfort her. Then she felt the shift. Small feet. Skittering movements. Rats. Dozens of them. Slipping from cracks and corners, appearing like shadows. They surrounded her in a slow, deliberate circle, tails curled, black eyes blinking. She froze. Her breathing hitched. She dared not move. She remembered the boy with the bitten leg. The elder who never walked straight again. She braced herself, waiting for the first bite. Then a pair of bare feet stepped softly onto the dirt. Nala. She walked with the stillness of someone who did not need to hurry. The rats parted for her, parting like wind before rain. She looked down at the woman, the one who once screamed, "You are nothing. Not even your mother wanted you." Now, that same woman bowed so low, her lips touched soil. "I'm sorry," the stepmother rasped. "Please. I was wrong." I didn't know. I didn't know you were. Her words crumbled. Tears streaked her face. Her body shook. But Nala said nothing. She simply knelt. And from the pocket of her wrapper, she pulled one grain of millet. She leaned forward. Held it between her fingers. Then gently, with no hate, no joy, no mockery, placed it on her stepmother's tongue. The woman's eyes widened. She didn't move. The rats remained still. Then, as if on command, they retreated. Vanished into cracks and crevices. Gone like breath into wind. The stepmother sobbed in relief, collapsing on her side, curling like a baby in the dust. But the relief did not last. By morning, she awoke to fire in her belly. It began with cramps. Then a tightening. Then the scream. She vomited. Once. Then again. Nothing would stay. Not the porridge a neighbor offered. Not the roasted maize a passing child shared. Every grain, cooked or raw, turned to poison in her body. Her throat would swell. Her tongue would blister. Her stomach would twist in agony. By the third day, the healer shook his head. She is cursed, he whispered. But not by spirits. By justice. The villagers watched her waste away, not to death, but to shame. She could eat only leaves, unripe fruits, bitter roots. She walked like a ghost. Hollow. Dry. Even the dogs stopped barking at her. And whenever she saw millet, sorghum, rice, she would cover her mouth and flee, gagging. She tried to steal a yam once. The rats found her first. They did not bite. They only watched. Silent. Eyes gleaming like cold coals. She ran. And Nala? She remained at the heart of her compound. Feeding children. Giving only to the innocent. Never raising her voice. Never seeking revenge. But one day, when a group of girls came with stories of beatings from another cruel auntie, she paused. She said only one thing. Let her live in a world where every grain reminds her of who she buried. And the girls, young as they were, understood. Some stories are told with fire. Others, with famine. The harvest moon rose, fat and orange, its light spilling over the cracked earth and shimmering fields like a blessing and a warning. In the hush that came with it, the village held its breath. Because they had learned, year after year, when the moon was fullest and the air smelled of drying husks, something returned with the silence. Bites. Not large. Not gory. But unmistakable. Little crescent marks on ankles. On wrists. On the soft part behind the knees. Always fresh. Always red. And always found on the skin of those who had once laughed at Nala. Who had mocked her silence. Starved her. Beaten her. They would wake up gasping, clawing at their blankets, flinging their legs out of mosquito nets. Shouting, "It's nothing, it's a dream," until they saw the tiny tooth marks. Some still denied it. But others remembered the past too well to lie. They whispered among themselves, "It's her." Still watching. Still remembering. And it didn't stop there. Their children, innocent, but born of the guilty, began to speak of dreams. Dreams where small black shapes watched them from the corners of rooms. Where tiny red eyes blinked from behind cooking pots. Where grains moved without wind. "Did you see them again?" one girl whispered to another at the well. The other nodded, eyes wide. "3 of them. Sitting on the edge of my bed. They didn't move. They just watched." By the 5th year, no one laughed. The chiefs who remained alive passed new laws, their fingers trembling as they held the carved staff. No girl shall be locked in a granary or room without a hearing of the council. No girl shall be denied food in her father's house. No girl shall be silenced without witness. And the people listened, not because the laws were just, but because they were afraid. The word spread like wind through dry stalks, "Bury a girl in grain, and she may rise with teeth." Children repeated it in song. Elders carved it on doorposts. Some began leaving bits of roasted yam, millet cakes, or dried cassava near their thresholds at dusk. Not for ancestors, but for the rats. Offerings. Signs of peace. Because the rats had become more than vermin, they were omens now. Sacred. Untouchable. A boy who struck one with a broom was found the next morning with scratch marks across his back, a fever in his bones, and a whisper in his ears, "Watch where you aim." Even the priests stopped casting rats out of shrines. They said, if they come, let them. Perhaps they carry prayers we don't understand. And Nala? She was never seen much. But some claim they spotted her, older now, walking through fields after the harvest. Always barefoot. Always surrounded by the silent rustle of tails and grass. She never spoke. But when girls saw her, they bowed. And when old men saw her, they turned their faces and muttered apologies no one asked for. Because there are spirits that haunt with chains. And then there are those that haunt with memory. With tiny teeth. With soft feet. With justice. Nala lives at the edge now. Not in exile. Not in shame. But in a stillness that the village has come to respect and fear. Her hut is made of mud and ash. Its thatch is always dry, even in the rains. No one remembers the last time she fetched water. No one sees her in the market. Yet her compound is never empty. Children, especially the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, bring her offerings. Folded leaves filled with millet, charred yam, or sweetened cassava. They place them gently at the boundary, where the earth changes color. None dare cross the line without reason. Because her home is surrounded, not by fences or thorns, but by holes. Thousands of them. Little tunnels dug into the earth like eyes that never blink. Some say the rats built them as a shield. Others say the land itself opened up to honor her. Whatever the truth, no predator ever enters. No thief returns. At night, the village grows quiet. Too quiet. The old women say, "Listen." And if you truly listen, you might hear it, a soft scratching under the floors, in the walls, beneath your mat. Not loud. Not frantic. Just present. Steady. Watching. Those who have wronged others, who have taken grain from a girl's plate or raised a hand too fast, they do not eat on those nights. They know better. Because it's not just the food that might turn bitter. It's the sleep. If your hands are clean, the villagers say, sleep easy. If not, let hunger be your prayer. They speak it not as threat, but as tradition. A proverb, worn smooth by years and fear. Sometimes, during the crescent moon, a trader passing by will pause near the compound and glimpse her, the girl who was once locked in a granary. Now grown. Still silent. Still watching. She sits on a low stool, carved from discarded grain shells. In her lap, she holds a calabash. She pours grain from one hand to the other, letting the millet fall like golden rain between her fingers. And around her, the rats bow their heads, as if in prayer. As if remembering. As if waiting for the next hand to rise.